All right, welcome back to the rest of you. As you'll see up on the board here, and as I discussed in class last week, I've tried to put together a short course on small group communication. This is one of the classes that I took and, to be honest, struggled with a bit in undergrad. So I recognize that you all have a challenge in doing a persuasive speech at the end of the semester. I also recognize for a lot of you that the bigger challenge with this project is that you're not working alone. You're working in small groups with other people. So my goal for today is to give you some basic small group communication theory with the hope that you all won't go home and kill each other, but that your groups will actually function very smoothly and you'll get along well. The good news here is that this is the major project that you have left between now and the end of the semester. You'll probably have a couple mini speeches. You all will have a final exam. But other than that, this is the big project that you'll have a lot of class time to work on. You'll have a lot of outside of class time to work on. So I just want to give you some of the tools that I've learned the hard way in a lot of cases so that you all don't kill each other and can function together as a group. Now, there's a famous textbook that I had when I was in your shoes that talks about small group communication, and it starts off with one of the best introductions to small group communication that I've ever seen. So Dan Rothwell's In Mixed Company often has, it's in the 7th edition now, but it often has quotations from actual students from his student evals. One of them starts off and it says, if God had ordered a committee to create the world, it would still be discussing proposals. Another says, for every group that I've enjoyed, there have been a dozen groups looking to make my life miserable and succeeding. And the last one's probably my favorite one. I hate groups. I hate group assignments. I hate teachers who require group assignments. Take the hint. Now, why someone who would write that at the end of the semester for a class they signed up for, specifically on small group communication, is beyond me. I also recognize that a lot of students have had really bad experiences in the past, have had some horror stories, and probably are not too excited about doing small group communication. I recognize that it's a challenge for a lot of people, but that's exactly why I want you all to do it, because a lot of you will have to do small group communication in the workplace or in organizations that you're going to be a part of. I'd much rather have you have the theory and the skills and the training and the practice now than to learn some of these things the hard way without someone else teaching you or without going through it on your own. So I know that a lot of you are not particularly looking forward to the small group aspect of this project, but that's part of why I want you to be able to do it well, and that's why I'm giving you the theory to help you do it. So before we get there, I am curious, I'm guessing with about 300 of you in this room, that somebody probably has a horror story or maybe some strategies for us. I want you to think back on other times that you've done small group work, and I want you to share what does or doesn't work from that experience. Does anybody have a story that they want to share? Or a strategy or advice that they want to give? Go ahead.
It works a lot better when everyone's working on it rather than one person.
Good, yes. The idea with small group communication is that we're all supposed to work together, and if we all work together well, that the project should be easier. The problem is that in some groups, one person will get stuck doing a lot or all of the work, and that's usually not fair to that person. It's also usually not the greatest for the other people in the group as well. Yeah?
Also maybe setting up some text chat boxes.
Okay.
You know, like just a group chat.
Yeah, so you might want to have some technology involved to help facilitate conversation and dialogue among your group. I will caution you a little bit later today about the use of technology. I find that oftentimes groups do work better when they still work face-to-face. We'll talk about some strategies, but nevertheless, if you don't have the option to work face-to-face, using technology to your advantage is usually a good idea. Anybody else want to share? Go ahead, Kale.
Define exactly what each person needs to do. It helps.
Good, yeah, having clearly defined roles and giving people clear expectations, holding people to doing the job that they said they'd sign up for, making sure that everybody knows what their role is and that everybody is doing their responsibilities. That's a good way to make sure everyone's not falling behind. Anybody have any horror stories that they want to share? Some bad group experiences that you've had? These are always fun. Yeah?
In high school, we had this big World War I project due,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought we all would agree that we would meet up. Well, we didn't meet up, and it ended up that I had to do all the work, and it was very stressful. And it's really not fun when someone gets credit for what you worked all day.
Yeah, so Maya said that when she was in high school, she had this big project on World War I that she had to do. She thought her group was going to meet up. They ended up not meeting up, and so she got stuck doing all of the work herself. I've also had that experience. There was a time when I was supposed to do a book report over winter break in high school, and the other two people in my group would much rather sit and gossip about reality television than they were much more excited about that than they were about meeting as a group and discussing the book that we were supposed to write about. So I read the entire book and did the book report by myself. I think it was a 20-minute book report that I had to prepare by myself. It was pretty exhausting, and they got credit for my work just like Amaya's group got credit for her work, and that's not really fair. Anybody else want to share any horror stories or successes or strategies? Yeah.
I find it always works out better if you don't expect your teammates to be your friend all the time.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of people, when they're put in a group together, they tend to have the expectation that everybody's, going to get along really well with each other, and it's going to be this great thing. When I think when you focus more on getting it done and don't necessarily have that expectation, and just sort of respect that people are different, it tends to work out better, I think, emotionally for everybody.
Yeah, so sometimes I think what you're trying to say is sometimes even if you're friendly with the members of your group, you still have to tell them hard truths. You still have to keep them on task when they're straying from a task. So it's often the case that when groups get along pretty well, they're usually pretty productive together, but sometimes somebody has to be the bad guy and say, hey, we're getting too distracted, we're getting off topic. Good. Anybody have any success stories, groups that you've been a part of that worked particularly well? I can think of one that comes to mind. I was the president of a chapter of a youth organization that I was part of in high school, and I happened to be working with a lot of my closest friends. I pretty much handpicked the executive board of who I wanted to be on board with me. So I already had previous relationships with those people, and my leadership strategy at the time was very bottom-up rather than very top-down. So I tried really hard to ask them what they wanted to do in their positions, and I tried to help them toward their own goals rather than coming in with a clear, concrete vision of my own and saying, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And that generally worked out pretty well for us. So there's a lot of things that we can think about. I'm guessing that the vast majority of you in here have probably had more bad experiences with groups than good ones. And I'm hoping that that's not the case, but it's often the case that a lot of students come to group projects colored from previous experiences and saying, that last time I had a group project, it didn't go so well, so I'm just going to do the whole thing myself this time. That's not going to work particularly well for the project that you have, in part because you all have to deliver it together. So everybody's got to do their part, but also because the project is pretty large, and if you try to take it on yourself, you're doing a whole lot of research, you're doing a whole lot of speaking. If it's hard enough to give a speech on your own that's 5 minutes, imagine trying to write a 25-minute or 20-minute persuasive speech that you'll deliver and that your group mates aren't going to help you with. So I want to help give you some strategies, and these strategies are not just me talking out of the top of my head and making things up, but these are actual social scientists in my field who have studied what works and what doesn't work for small group communication with the goal of helping make our teams work a little bit better. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions that are out there about small group communication. If you look at the beginning of your textbook, there's a lot of misconceptions about public speaking. There are just as many, if not more of them, about what makes group work effective and what makes group work fall apart. So your participation question for the day, if you want to go ahead and log into Blackboard, is to deal with these misconceptions. I've given you 4 statements up on the board. Only one of those statements is factually accurate. The other 3 are not. And so these are things that have been borne out in the research, and people went in with expectations, maybe thinking this statement would be otherwise, and then the research said, no, it's actually this way. So I want you to go ahead and log into Blackboard. It's hard to believe, but we are in week 13. So you can go ahead and log in, try to answer this question. If you have any trouble answering this question, I want you to go ahead and email your lab instructor your answer to this question. Again, your task is to figure out which of these 4 statements is true. This looks like a question you might receive on your final exam. I'm not going to hold you to having the right answer today, but I want you to try and guess based on your own experience or based on what you know. If you think you've got the right answer, go ahead and talk to a classmate about it. See if you came up with the same answer. Which one did you choose and why? All right, raise your hand if you said A. Anybody say A? One or two? A couple of people in here said A. Raise your hand if you said B. About half of you. Raise your hand if you said C. About, I don't know, 10% of you, okay. Raise your hand if you said D. Anybody? At least one, two, couple? Okay. Does anybody want to share which one they chose and why? Seems like we're a little mixed in here. Go ahead.
I chose B, and the reason because that is like I've had a group before where everybody's like, okay, this is the right answer, and I'm there like, no, this is not. It's right here. It's not, and they don't believe you can get it wrong.
Okay, so sometimes majority decision making can rule out the person who happens to be right. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I would agree with B as well.
Okay.
Because, like, let's just say A and C. They kind of like, it says effective small group communication, always avoid conflict.
Okay.
I mean, there's always going to be like some form of conflict.
Okay.
And, you know, like you said earlier, group communication, they would be talking about something else than what the actual topic would be. So, you know, more communication between the groups may not always be the best thing.
Okay. Fair enough. So you kind of went process of elimination. That led you to B. Did anybody choose a different answer? Or maybe, go ahead.
I chose C. Just
Okay.
because, like, the more you talk to your group, the more you can understand what page everyone is on and where everyone's thinking the group project is going.
Okay, so you chose C because oftentimes groups fail to communicate in the first place, and that's where a lot of things go wrong. Maybe a group member will disappear, won't show up to group meetings, or won't respond to emails. That's a really frustrating experience. Please don't do that to your group mates. So you're saying more communication early on can help keep the group on the same page and help everybody get along pretty well. Anybody want to defend A or D here? Yeah.
I said D because in the end, I'm not here to be your friend. We don't have to be friends.
Uh-huh.
Be buddies. Just as long as the task is done, just realize that we are all trying to achieve the same goal here.
Yeah, so eventually what you're being evaluated on or what you're trying to accomplish together is that task. And so you're saying as long as that task gets done, I don't have to be your friend. Fair enough. Anybody want to defend A? The group communication always avoids conflict. Maybe not. Okay, so we're starting to think we know what the right answer is. I'm going to walk through some of these miscommunications, and over the course of the lecture today, I'll let you know which one of these is correct. But the important thing is to recognize is that there's a lot of kind of assumptions that we make when we head into small group communication. Those assumptions can often get us into trouble. You've heard me say my favorite line about assumptions. I'm not going to repeat it here again. But there's a lot of them that are problematic. So let me just, there we go. I'm going to rule out option A, that conflict is always a bad thing, or that good group communication should always avoid conflict. And to do that, I'm going to walk you through a model from 1965 from Bruce Tuckman. Bruce Tuckman talks about the 4 phases that most groups develop. He's actually added a 5th phase, adjournment, which is basically that the group has done what it set out to do, and you all have to figure out how you're going to debrief from that and go on your way. Now, what's helpful about this structure, these 4 categories, is that they are rhyming, so they're pretty easy to remember. The first phase that Tuckman talks about is the group formation phase, and that is your group gets together, they form, Maybe you all knew each other beforehand. Maybe you didn't know each other beforehand. Regardless, you're probably going to learn some new things about each other, especially as it relates to the task that you've been given. So in that early forming phase, you're not really focused a whole lot on the task yet. What you're probably doing is just really asking questions, getting to know each other, maybe trying to divide up roles, maybe talking about who wants to take which part of the project, maybe talking about who likes to do which kinds of tasks that you have to do the big project as a whole, maybe just getting to know each other as people and just trying to get along. So you're forming, you haven't really thought much about the task or how you're going to accomplish the task yet. It's just kind of that initial phase of getting to know each other. From there, what often happens is actually an explicit conflict phase. Tuckman calls this phase storming. And storming means that you all will get into conflict. It's actually an expected part of the communication process in small groups, that the conflict may not be very large, it might not be very high stakes. If you think back to what I said about having an argument versus making an argument, sometimes you'll be having an argument and it'll get really emotional, and it's not really about the thing that you're fighting about, but it's more about people not getting along. Sometimes you'll be making an argument and somebody wants to do one thing one way and somebody wants to do another thing another way, and you're not necessarily mad at each other, but you still have to make the case for why your side is right. It is a common feature of small group work that groups will have conflict at some point during the process. A lot of groups think that conflict is a bad thing, and I tried to mention that there's this culture of Minnesota or North Dakota nice that kind of says we're not supposed to have conflict, we're not supposed to be uncivil. A lot of groups will go into a process and say, if we start to have conflict, we got to quash that conflict right away. And the problem with that is often if you ignore a conflict or if you try to pretend like a conflict's not there, what often happens is that conflict will surface later on. It's kind of like a repressed memory. So maybe somebody has been harboring resentment since the first day that you all met and they don't talk about it, and then it's the night before your project is due and they say they're not going to do their part because nobody listened to them. If you wait on that conflict phase, it will find its way to you. It's not usually the case that groups get through a big project like this and don't have some kind of conflict. So my best advice for you all is that you should actually recognize that conflict is normal, embrace it when it happens, and be okay with that conflict phase, because oftentimes you need to get through the rough patches in order to recalibrate your relationship to each other, in order to reorient yourself toward the task that you're trying to accomplish. That's the third phase that Tuckman talks about, and it's called the norming phase. In the norming phase, what you do is you recognize, okay, we had this conflict. Jenny and Jason are disagreeing about what to do. We're going to have to figure out as a group how we're going to get them on the same page and how we're going to get back to ourselves. And so it's that recalibration process that takes place after conflict. And usually it's in the norming phase where you really get excited about what you're doing and how you're going to go about doing it. If you try to jump from storming to performing, most of the time that doesn't work so well, and you're going to end up back in the storming and norming phases. Now, you can probably imagine what the performing phase is, and that is that you all are doing what you're supposed to be doing. That maybe it's your deliberation day, and you're actually giving the project that you've all done. That's the end point. It's hard to envision that end point when you're still in the forming phase. And Tuckman says that these stages are not necessarily linear. That is, you don't always go from form through storm to norming and then performing. But what often happens is groups will start and stop, and they'll get going, and then they'll have a conflict, and then they think they got through the norming phase, and they might go through 2 or 3 more storming phases before they ultimately get to performing. Some groups never make it past the storming stage, and that will be very obvious to your lab instructor. That will be very obvious to your classmates if there are unsettled disagreements by the time that you give your deliberations in a couple of weeks. So recognize these 4 phases: form, storm, norm, perform. Recognize that it's healthy for a lot of groups to go through conflict. I know in the United States we're kind of conflict averse. I want you to recognize that conflict can sometimes be okay and is often a necessary step in figuring out how to get your group to work better together. In that forming phase, it's usually hard to be able to predict what those conflicts will be, and they'll kind of arise organically. If you try to shy away from conflict, you're going to find yourself having bigger and probably more serious conflicts and closer to your deadline. I've tried to tell you that the 5 canons are as much about stopping you all from procrastinating as they are about trying to help you give a good speech. If you are finding yourself redoing invention and arrangement and style the night before your deliberation, you're probably not going to do so well on this project. So it's important that you keep each other in line and that you help each other through these 4 phases. Let me walk you through another misconception here. I want to ask you to plot out a graph. I want you to actually draw with your fingers where you think this graph goes. So we have on the x-axis how cohesive your group is. That is how well you all get along and how well you all talk to each other and how much you feel like friends. On the y-axis, we have productivity. That is, how productive is your group at getting done what they need to be able to accomplish. So in unison, I want you to actually draw with your finger if you think it's a linear relationship, if you think it's an exponential relationship, if you think it's curvilinear, if you think it kind of zigzags. Go ahead and draw what you think this graph looks like. Interesting. I'm actually seeing a lot of people saying it goes like this, that if you have very low cohesion and you're all just focused on the task, you'll get a lot done, and the more cohesive your group is, the more you get distracted talking about the Kardashians or Game of Thrones. It's actually neither of those things. It's not that it goes this way either, but instead it's actually a curvilinear relationship where there's a sweet spot right in the middle. A lot of groups think that group work is only about getting done the task that you want to get done. It is not. In fact, most groups who think that way and think only about the task don't do so well, and they usually find themselves storming a lot more. If you think about it, this curvilinear relationship kind of makes sense too, because on the one hand, you have to have some trust, and you have to have some accountability, and you have to feel like you like each other in order to work together at all. If you don't know anyone in your group, or if you don't like the people in your group, it's probably going to be hard for you to delegate tasks and to keep people accountable to tasks, because most of the time you're right, it's not just about being your friend, it's also about making sure that you stay on task when you get distracted. If you don't trust me, you're not going to listen to that. There's a sweet spot where we're sort of cohesive and we get along pretty well and we trust each other, where productivity goes way up. Anything beyond that, what happens is groups get distracted and they focus so much more on the relationship than they do on the task, and nobody's willing to be that bad guy who says, hey, I know we're excited about whatever tangent we're off on right now, but we have to pull back and we have to work together as a group. So recognize that as both task and relationship are part of group communication, a lot of groups will focus explicitly on one at the expense of the other. It's actually important that you focus on both of those things. If you're a group that is very task-oriented, those relationships are going to slip really quickly because a lot of people will start becoming dictators and saying, you do this, you do that, you do that. And the relationship component gets a little lost and people start wondering, well, why am I listening to him? Why do I have to do that? Why can't someone else do that part? So be careful of that balance. One of the biggest challenges in small group communication classes is that they explicitly say in the textbook, tasks and relationships are both incredibly important and you need both of them in order for a group to work well. And students read that and they do well on an exam, and then they go into the group project and they forget it. And then they focus only on the task and it doesn't go so well, or they focus only on the relationship and that doesn't go so well either. The third one is really where the right answer is today. So the third one was about majority rule. And majority rule is good in a lot of situations, but I want to remind you all that just because we live in a democracy, just because we have voting and we do kind of operate our politics based on majority rule, that it's not always the best strategy. Now, there's a couple different things that are pros about majority rule that a lot of people like. And one of them is that it tends to be a democratic process. A lot of us have, if we live in a democracy, if we grew up in a democracy, we like the idea of having our voices heard. It's that we the people mentality that we get in the first 3 words of the Constitution. It's democratic, and as a result, it makes most people happy most of the time. It's an ethical system known as utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It's not always the case that you can please everybody, but you can please most of the people most of the time, and a lot of us like to strive toward that. We recognize that we might not be able to hold out for consensus and having everyone on the same page, but nevertheless, it's the best option in a lot of cases. However, just because we live in a democracy and just because that democracy is often good for us, doesn't mean that it's good all of the time. A lot of people make the assumption that it is, but it isn't always the case. And majority rule can often make members of the minority in your group unhappy. And when I'm talking minority, I could mean demographics. It is the case that we have some implicit biases, and some people might be more likely to be taken seriously or to emerge as leaders. But I'm not only talking about demographic minorities. I think it's important that we recognize that people who don't get their way in a project are often unhappy. There's another concept that we'll talk about in a minute here, and that concept is known as groupthink. We'll talk about that. That's a problem for majority rule and one of the other types that we're going to talk about today. But groupthink is essentially the idea that people nod and smile and go along with something even if they're unhappy with it, oftentimes because it's the first big idea that the group proposes and people don't want to think critically about other possible solutions. They just want to get the thing done as quickly as possible. So we'll go into more detail about groupthink and what it means and why it matters. The important thing with majority rule is that it's often for issues that are not super important. So maybe you don't want to use majority rule to choose your topic for your deliberation, because if 2 people in your group of 6 are unhappy with that topic, they're not going to put a whole lot of energy into doing the research for it. They're not going to be very excited about talking about it. Oftentimes, majority rule also works well for decisions that we have to make pretty quickly. That's why a lot of people like it. We've been debating this thing for 15 minutes. I just want to make a decision. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. Okay, the ayes have it. We win. It's over. Now, a lot of times we presume that majority rule is the best option, but it can be very problematic. And you've probably been in situations where you've lost the vote in a meeting and you've been mad about it, not just for a day or two, but maybe you're mad about it through the entire time that you're working at a place or the entire time that you interact with people. So majority rule can be useful. It can be one of the best strategies for you. There are other ways to make decisions, and I want you to consider what those are as well. A second strategy that a lot of groups use is what's called minority rule. And there are pros and cons to this one as well. Minority rule is when you have a leader or maybe a couple of leaders within a group. They're a small minority, but they're the most vocal minority. I'll tell you one of my favorite lines that I ever heard about minority rule was from an unfortunate situation that a friend of mine was in. We were in an organization together. He was the president of that organization. A lot of the people who were on the executive board with him were not particularly interested in running the organization. So it ended up that my friend Harry ran that organization pretty much single-handedly. He ran it really well, but you can probably guess that after running it for an entire year, he was pretty exhausted from doing everything and not getting a whole lot of support. So at the end of the year, at the end of my first year, we held elections for the president of the new organization. We elected another friend, and I asked Harry a question about minor business, about something that had to be taken care of in the next week, and that was his response to me. You can direct this straight to the department of, "That's not my problem anymore." So you can probably imagine that minority rule can be bad if people feel like they're the only ones responsible for something, which I think is what Amaya was trying to tell us earlier. Nevertheless, there are some pros even to minority rule. Sometimes you're in a group and nobody wants to take charge. We talked about roles and assigning roles and holding people accountable for what they said they would do. Sometimes you get into a group and say, okay, who wants to get us started? And you all just stare blankly at each other, and it kind of becomes this nose game thing of I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it either, and the last person to touch their nose has to do it, and they get stuck with it. So sometimes minority rule can be useful in order to get things started, or if somebody feels very strongly and passionate about something, it gives them the option to take the lead on a project. Oftentimes when I see this in small group deliberations at the end of the semester, what happens is one person gets really excited about a topic. Maybe they've researched that topic for another class. Maybe it's something that affects them personally. Maybe it's something that they're very excited about. Sometimes if you know a lot about a topic, or if you're really excited about it, you can take the lead on that and give people other directions, and that can be an efficient process to make the whole thing faster. Nevertheless, there's a lot of cons to this. One of those cons is that if you're involving fewer people in decision making, it often leads to conflict. And sometimes if one person is a very strong, charismatic leader, someone else wants to be the leader and they don't like the way that that leadership is going. So you might be really excited, but another of your group members wants to be the leader, and then you get into power struggles. That's when that storming phase will emerge. If you don't have input from all of your members, that's also a problem because people will not necessarily tell you what their wants and needs are for the project, and that's when they're less likely to engage, they're more likely to tune out, they're not so interested in sticking together. Minority rule, as borne out by the research, often works best when you have a leader who is charismatic, a leader who the rest of the group supports and trusts, and who can make strong and fair decisions. We often have leaders who we don't really trust all that much, but they've been elected to a position and we don't really like what they have to say. If that leadership is not so good, you're going to have a coup d'etat in your group and a whole bunch of people are going to be fighting, and you might be fighting again toward the very end of your project. You might have to start this deliberation over from scratch. So I want to caution you against just listening to the one person who has the idea that they're really excited about, because if the rest of you are not on board, that's not going to go so well. I'll caution you that when I took a small group class as an undergrad, we had to do a speech on hydroponic farming, which is like indoor farming in these giant skyscraper buildings. I grew up in a city. I had no idea what hydroponic farming was, and neither did 4 of my group mates. It ended up being a pretty good project where we learned some stuff, but we were all kind of cautious about taking that topic in the first place, and we were a little bit too Minnesota nice to say, I don't even know what hydroponic farming is. And this poor other group member had to take leadership until we were all able to fill in the gaps. Fortunately, we were a pretty functional group and we were interested in learning more, but it doesn't always work out that way, and sometimes you will have a dictator who is not a benevolent dictator who will cause a lot of problems for you. The third strategy that Rothwell talks about is unanimity or consensus. When you have unanimous decision making, it means that everyone is on the same page and that they all agree on everything. And that's usually the best idea. It's unanimous, we don't know what to do. That's a problem that you can run into sometimes when people raise their hands. More on that when we go back to groupthink in a minute here. One of the pros of unanimity is that it means if everybody is actually voicing what they say and they actually mean it, then you're all on the same page and everyone's happy. It's not the utilitarian greatest good for the greatest number of people, but you actually have full consensus among your group members, and as a result, everyone is satisfied. And often that means you have better decisions. When Rothwell talks about these 3 different decision-making strategies, he says that unanimity is usually the best one if you can get to it. If you can get everyone on the same page, that usually means that you won't go through as much storming and you'll be able to perform much better. You can probably imagine some cons that go with unanimous decision making, and one of them is that it's often difficult and time consuming. A lot of groups will take a lot of time trying to get to consensus. You have no guarantee that everyone in your group will always be on the same page. In most cases, you can have 2 members of a group and you can have 3 or 4 different opinions even just with those 2 people. So you imagine if you zoom out to 5 or 6 or 20, there's probably not a great chance that you will be able to have unanimous decision making. But a lot of groups in trying to get to unanimous decision making will instead settle for majority rule. And they'll say, we're taking too long on this, we can't get to unanimous decision making, so we're just going to do majority rule. And in that case, sometimes that's the best option that you have, and so that's what you go with. If you can, or if you think you can get to consensus, that's probably the best thing that you can do for yourself, probably the best thing that you can do for your group. It may mean that you may need to meet earlier and more often, and that people might have to really have their voices heard and not just sit by quietly. But if you can get to that, usually what it means is that your task and your relationships are usually better. If you all get along, if you're all on the same page, if you feel like you can trust each other, it's easier to get done what you need to get done. So I recommend that if you can, if the decision's an important one, that you try as much as possible to get to consensus or unanimity. If you have time for it, it's usually the best decision-making strategy. So majority rule is not always the best option. It can be when you're rushed, or it can be when you have really stalemate among your group. It can be a good way out of it, but any time that you can get to unanimous decision-making, the small group communication literature is pretty unequivocal that it's the best kind of decision-making that you can have. Now, I warned you that there's a flip side to group decision-making, and especially unanimity, that can be a problem. That problem is something I called groupthink. What groupthink means is that there's a bunch of people in a meeting who say, yes, I'm on board with this, and in their head, they're thinking, no. Groupthink you might think of as akin to peer pressure. It's kind of like somebody proposes an idea, and I don't have a better one, so I'm just going to nod and smile. Or I really like the person who proposed the idea, so I'm going to go with her idea. Or I don't want to be the devil's advocate, I have some reservations, but I don't want to speak them. Groupthink is when the group thinks that it's all on the same page, and it thinks that it's all getting along, and it thinks that it's ready to move on to the next step of the project, but a bunch of people are saying "I" when you take a vote, and in their head they're thinking things like, "Say it ain't so, you've got to be kidding, perish the thought, heaven forbid, no, 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 1,000 times no." Conformity is a big problem with groupthink because it will often lead into what you think is a performing phase. You think your group is working really well together. You think you're ready to finish whatever it is that you need to do. And then somebody who didn't speak up earlier, who should have raised their hand and said, "I'm not so sure about this," or "I have no idea what I'm doing," or "I don't like this project," or "I don't like how you're going about doing it," or "You guys aren't treating me well." Those kinds of comments need to come up earlier, or you're going to end up storming and having much more conflict again. There's a couple other cautionary tales that I will warn you about. First is the idea, this is actually what groups are supposed to do. The idea behind small group communication is that we're supposed to be able to have synergy. What synergy means is that we are supposed to have an easier job getting a big task done if we all work together than any one of us would have had individually. That is, the whole of who takes on what is greater than the sum of its part. The whole of what you're able to produce as a group is much better than a project that each one of you would have done individually. If I gave each of you a 20-minute speech to do between now and the semester, some of you could do it and you'd do a pretty good job with it. A lot of you would probably struggle with it. And so the idea is that we all have a piece of the puzzle to contribute, and that if we all do our part and we all put our puzzle piece in, that we can have this bigger picture and be able to get done what we want to get done. The cautionary tale that I'm trying to warn you of is what's called negative synergy. Rather than thinking of group work as a puzzle, it's much more like a set of dominoes. Why screw up alone when you can take other people down with you? Negative synergy is a real threat, and it's something that happens in groups all the time. You get a disgruntled group member, you have a meeting, you think the meeting's pretty productive, you go home after the meeting, and that disgruntled group member talks to a friend, and that friend is like, "Oh, I didn't see it that way. I'm with you. I don't like this either." And then they talk to another friend, and suddenly half or more than half of your group doesn't like what you're up to. What negative synergy means is that your collective problems are worse than what your individual problems would be. So some of you really are good at invention, and you like coming up with ideas, and you like research. Some of you are better with style. Some of you are better with delivery. What's going to happen with negative synergy is the people who thought that they were good with a particular canon or a particular task are going to say, "I don't want to do this task that I've been asked to do," and they'll start acting up, and they'll start trying to take the rest of the group down with them. So I want you to be very cautious about that possibility, because it doesn't necessarily mean that because you're working all together that you're working better together. This is where that other miscommunication of more communication is not always better communication comes in, because we can have times when the group is communicating a whole lot, but everybody is just sitting there and complaining and venting, and if you pardon my French, bitching to each other, right? We're sitting there and we're not getting anything done. We're communicating a heck of a lot, but we're not getting anywhere. That's the thing that I want to caution you about. The third issue that a lot of groups often have is with what's called social loafing. Social loafing is, instead of everybody contributing their part to the puzzle, somebody forgets to bring their puzzle piece. It's that group member who doesn't participate in various things. They generally do less working as part of a group than they would do if they were tasked with the same thing on their own. So let's say instead of giving you a 20-minute speech that you all do together, I give you a 5-minute speech like your other speeches. A social loafer might get an A on the first speech, might get a B on the second speech, and might do nothing for that third speech. That's not really fair, and it's usually not the case that that person is just lazy. What's often the case is that they don't know what their role is, or they don't know how to do it, or there's some other problem that they haven't spoken about earlier. What social loafing is if we are all lifting this table together, and there's 4 of us, and we're all on each corner. Social loafing is the person who lifts the table like this, and they're not actually lifting the table, but they just have a finger on it to make it look like they're doing something. I'll tell you some cautionary tales. I taught this class over the summer. I have my groups actually turn in everything that they have, a portfolio of everything they have of who did what. So this includes things like who took which part of the speech, but it also includes things like who did and didn't respond to emails. So they send me their email chain. And I have records from a student from the summer who did not respond to an email chain for weeks at a time, and his group members got very frustrated. The student then sent me an email and said, I am not pleased. I am concerned that I'm getting a bad grade on this speech. Can you tell me why the rest of my group did well and I didn't? And I said, well, I have evidence from your group that you didn't do your part. And that person's grade went down 2 whole letter grades as a result of them not participating in this assignment. So you can imagine it didn't go so well for them. There's a reason why I put this one at the end of the semester. The social loafer in your group is the one who acts like they're doing more than they're actually doing. And in groups where you don't show the evidence, if you don't show your work, if you don't say who's done what, it's hard to tell when there are social loafers, and that's usually when 1 person or 2 people will take over an entire project and the rest of the people will deliver a speech that somebody else has written. Please, please, please do not be the social loafer to your group. That said, I also want to caution those of you who are inclined to take on leadership roles or who have had social loafers in the past to recognize that it's not always the case that it is the social loafer's fault that they are not participating the way that they normally would. One of the reasons why people engage in social loafing in the first place is actually not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, but because they don't feel like they're part of the group, or they don't feel like they know what they're supposed to do. Nobody made clear what their role was, or they're struggling with a part of their project and they don't know what to do next and they're afraid to ask for help. This is where that balance between task and relationship is really important, because if your group is communicating well and if you're good on the relationship front, your social loafer will be much more inclined to say, hey, I'm really struggling with my piece. Can somebody give me some advice about what I might do next, or can somebody else help me out on it? Oftentimes, it is not necessarily the fault of the social loafer that they're just being lazy, but rather that they feel like they're not really sure what they're supposed to do. It can also be the case that your social loafer wants to work hard and maybe there are extenuating circumstances. I'll tell you, I had a group project when I was an undergrad, and I think I've told you this before, that I don't like when professors joke about undergrads saying they have 7 grandmothers who all died right before the midterm exam. Because I lost 2 grandparents and a family friend within a week of each other while I was doing a group project as an undergrad. And I had to communicate to my group, hey, this is what's going on in my life. I will do as much as I can, but I might be a little bit slower on that. And so if you are good on the relationship front, that's going to help with the task front. That's going to help ensure that the social loafer is not just going to sit back and let everybody else do things for them. I also recognize that there's sort of an arbitrariness to assigning small group projects in the college setting. And some of that has to do with the fact that the worst that happens to you in a college setting is you get a bad grade in a class. And you can take that class again, or you can be fine with that bad grade. The worst that happens to you in the real world is you might get fired, or you might have coworkers not on speaking terms with you, or you might not have an opportunity to advance your career because you don't play well with others. So I'm going to encourage you as much as possible that if you notice someone socially loafing in your group, don't accuse them of being lazy, don't yell at them, ask them questions guided to bring them back to the group and to make them feel like more a part of the group when they're being distant. What do you need right now? How can I help you with that? Those are the kinds of things that usually help with social loafing. The best thing that helps with it is everybody being clear from the get-go who's going to do what, but that doesn't always happen. So in the absence of that, try to recalibrate your relationship to a social loafer, and usually the task stuff will follow if they feel welcome. Some of you have also probably seen this cautionary tale. It's a poem that I happen to love about group communication. I've seen it attributed to a bunch of different sources, so I don't have one person to give this back to. But I'll read this one out to you. It's a story about 4 people named Everybody, Somebody, Anybody, and Nobody. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was asked to do it. Everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. This is a cautionary tale that I see happening a lot, and that cautionary tale is that usually there's not just one person in the group who's social loafing, but that there are several, and somebody made assumptions that someone else would take care of something. Somebody else made an assumption that we'd all take part in something, and then 3 of the 4 people did, and we have to figure out how we get that 4th person on board. So keep this in mind, and please try not to be the social loafer in your group, because nobody likes having to do extra work based on what other people could have done that nobody actually did do. Now with that in mind, I want to give you some advice as you head into your small group communication, and that is to talk a little bit about the expectations for the assignment. I told you last week some of the deliberation components of it, like it has to have a thesis that's in the stasis of policy, some governing body, should, some specific policy. I mentioned that you're supposed to have a problem, cause, solution speech, and you're going to look at 3 or 4 possible solutions and choose the best possible one that you can get. You're going to want to take a look at that policy proposals handout, because that handout is going to help you figure out what are some common problems that people have when they propose things at the stasis of policy. For this project, you're going to be in small groups. I usually ask what the ideal size is for a group, and I usually ask my students, and some people will say 3, some people will say 10. The number that comes out periodically in the small group communication literature is 7. That is, it's big enough that we can divide tasks pretty evenly, but it's an odd number, so we still have a tiebreaker. Well, you can see that in classes of 25 to 38, I've split you up into groups of 6 to 8, because that's as close as we can get to that ideal number of 7. With 6 to 8 people, you have an 18 to 20-minute deliberation that you're going to do with all of those parts below. That means that if you divide up the work evenly, you are individually doing less work in your actual speaking than you would be for your other 2 projects. Your other 2 projects for this class have been 5-minute speeches. If you divide 20 by 6, that gives you about 2.5 minutes of speaking. It's not a whole lot of time, but the idea behind it is that you're doing more work on the front end of your speech. You're doing a lot of heavy lifting with your small groups. You're doing the 5 canons not individually, but collectively. And so if you're in a face-to-face class, you have an 18 to 20-minute speech. My online classes are not in groups of 7. They're in groups of 3 or 4, and they're giving a shorter speech. The reason for that is because communicating online is usually much harder than doing it face-to-face, and there have been about 2 decades worth of research that confirms that regularly. A lot of groups really, really struggle to do small group communication online. So in order to help you out and make sure that you don't kill each other, I've just got a set of recommendations, and that first recommendation I have for you is to start early. There's a reason why you don't have a whole lot of big major projects for this class other than this deliberation. You have about a month before you actually have to give your deliberation. So I want you to start talking to each other now, be in that forming phase, get to know your group members, schedule regular meetings. Your lab instructor should have scheduled in some time for you to deliberate in class. You're also going to have to make time out of class. As you're getting to know your group members, you want to make sure that you're doing a good balance of getting done what you need to get done, doing the task, but also maintaining your relationships. If you find yourself really task-oriented one day, reward yourself by doing something fun with the group the next time. Maybe you go out for coffee. Maybe you all hang out on the weekends. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you maintain that level of trust. If that relationship starts to fall apart, then the trust and the tasks will fall apart with it. You want to make sure also that if you have ideas or questions or concerns, that you don't keep those to yourselves, but that you share them with your group members. I know a lot of people don't like being what they see as the bad person in the group or the devil's advocate or the annoying one. It's important that you do speak up and that you do make your voice heard, because if you don't, you're going to end up doing it later when you don't want to, and your group's going to be mad about it and say, why didn't you do this earlier? A third recommendation I have for you is to be as clear as possible about your expectations. You all have the assignment prompt and rubric. You're going to want to make sure that you know what's expected of you. You want to make sure that you ask your lab instructor if you have questions about that assignment. But you also want to make sure that you divide up group roles and responsibilities. The more concrete you can be about Jenny's going to do this part and Eric's going to do that part and Susie's going to do that part, the better off you're going to be. You want to make sure that you also do your part once you've split up those roles. You want to be very clear about, I signed up to do this thing, I'm going to do this thing. Don't be the social loafer hanging off on the edge of the table, not lifting with your knees. All of you should be lifting with your knees. If someone happens to be a social loafer, recognize that it's not usually that person's fault, but that usually it's because they don't know what their role is, they don't know what's coming next, or they have some life circumstance going on. Be upfront about social loafing as soon as you start to notice it. The more you can try and bring people back into the relationship setting of your group, the better off your group will be. Another thing that I recommend is to meet in person whenever possible. When I took small group communication, one of the reasons why that was one of the few classes that I didn't get a solid A in as an undergrad is because we had an online assignment. We had to plan an entire vacation to Europe. It was a 3-week-long vacation. And we had to plan out a budget. We had to plan out hotels. We had to plan out transportation. We had to plan out events. And we had to do that project entirely online. And we had to turn in the online transcript of what we talked about. And as you can imagine, we spent a lot of time in our group not really focused on the task, and we were up the night before trying to figure everything out. One of the big challenges of meeting online is what's called asynchronous communication. What that means is that you're not all communicating at the same time. What it means is that you'll send out an email on Thursday, and 4 of your group members will respond to it on Saturday, 1 will respond on Sunday, and 1 will say, I never got the email, what are you talking about? You want to make sure that you meet in person whenever you can. You can still have some technology, you can still use the internet, you can set up a Facebook group or a GroupMe or something like that, but it's best when you can meet face-to-face whenever you can. The last recommendation I have for you is to function as a team and not as 6 to 8 individuals. It will be very clear if you have storming in your group, if your presentation doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, or if it jumps around from person to person or topic to topic. You want that presentation to sound as if one person wrote the whole thing and there's just 6 heads of the same monster delivering it. So that's what I'll leave you with today. Please go forward and don't kill each other. Review the small group communication stuff if you have trouble. Talk to your lab instructor, document what you have. I'll see you next week.